Hi everybody, my name's Drake Pledger and this is Flintlock Operator. You know, no matter who you are or if you shoot old muzzleloader firearms or modern centerfire pistol rifles or shotguns, there is a really good high possibility that you have had to contend with a natural physiological problem called the flinch. And what is the flinch? The flinch is a response to the report and the muzzle flash of whatever weapon it is that you are firing. There's a physiological response to the flash and the really loud noise that's happening just feet from your face and from your eyes and your ears. So your senses are overwhelmed and you have a tendency to recoil. And this is a very natural reaction that everybody has when they shoot firearms. And with muzzle loaders, especially flintlocks, we have double the trouble because not only is the report and the flash coming out from the end of the barrel, we're also getting a smaller one that's merely inches from our face. And it's not very loud, but there's light and there's smoke and there's heat. So our natural reaction is to really shy away from that explosion. So as shooters, one of our continual challenges is to overcome that physiological response, to overcome the flinch. So that's what we're going to be talking today. We're going to be talking about how to overcome the Flintlock Flinch. When I first began my journey in muzzle loading, I had no idea what I was doing. And in fact, that journey began with this very rifle. I didn't know how to load, shoot, or maintain a flintlock. The principles and techniques that we're going to cover in this video are ones that I've learned over the years, shooting not only muzzle loaders, but also modern firearms. And they're principles and techniques that I wish that I had known when I had started out over a decade ago. Whether you are new to muzzleloading or you're an experienced shooter, the training tips and techniques that we're going to cover in this video will go a long way to helping you form good habits, eradicating bad ones, and shortening the muzzleloading learning curve. Whenever I first started down my own journey of muzzleloading, I developed a really nasty flinch because I didn't understand what it took to have a reliable lock. And because my gun wouldn't go bang all the time, I was left wondering 50% or more of the time if my shot was going to go off. So I developed a really nasty flinch. So let's go ahead and talk about a few things that we can do that can help make our lock a lot more reliable. Our first lock reliability tip is to keep your lock clean. We actually have a full video on this, so we won't go over it too much in depth, but essentially we're going to want to clean all that powder residue out. It is very humid out here today in the woods of Kentucky. So anytime we take a shot, humidity is drawn into that burned powder, which absorbs it like a sponge. So we want to make sure that the pan is especially cleaned out and dry. Underneath the frizzen face, around the frizzen, underneath the flint, and just doing something little like that, and pulling out our vent pick, and keeping that touch hole clean and clear will go a long way to keeping our lock reliable. And it doesn't even take that long. You don't have to disassemble the gun, you don't have to pull the lock off, just give it a quick wipe down and you'll be good to go. Our second lock reliability tip is get to know your lock and especially the flint type and size that it likes. Every lock is going to be different, and even the machine-made ones are going to have their idiosyncrasies that you're going to have to go out and test for yourself. One thing that I find helpful is to take a piece of leather, or even better yet, a little piece of thin lead, and wrap the flint in it in the jaws. And that'll help hold it a lot tighter in the jaws and not let it move around near as much and get better sparks. Another thing I find very helpful is recording your lock functioning in slow motion. Most smartphones now have a slow motion feature, so you can easily slow down that footage and see exactly where and how the flint is contacting the frizzen. You can see if the frizzen is popping back like it needs to. When the flint strikes the frizzen, you want that frizzen to pop right open so that shower of sparks can fall directly onto your priming powder. So watching your lock in slow motion helps you learn how the lock better functions, as well as helps diagnose potential problems you might be running into. Our final lock reliability tip is using the right type of powder. Now you might think the right type of powder, like, well, should you use 1F, 2F, 3F, 4F. In my experience, I've used 2 and 3F powder, and I use the same grain size for the priming charge as well as the main charge in the barrel. And I have never had a problem with rapid ignition. Just a few minutes ago, you saw me pop off that shot at the beginning of the video. That is the same grain size in the priming charge as well as the main charge. And ignition was instantaneous. So what I have found actually matters is who makes the powder. I used to use GoX because that's what I could get. But I found that GoX does not have as rapid of ignition as the powder that I use right now, which is Schützen powder. I don't have any experience with the Swiss-made powder, but I hear it's very good. But the Schützen is a little bit easier for me to get a hold of. It's a little bit cheaper than the Swiss, and it works just fine in my guns. So lock tip number 3, figure out what type of powder works best in your firearm. You could use GoX, Swiss, or Schützen. I prefer Schützen. Now that we know our lock is functioning reliably, let's go ahead and dive into the actual techniques of conquering the flinch. We need to overcome 2 things to conquer the flinch. The first is the priming charge ignition, and the second is the detonation of the primary charge in the barrel. And ideally, these 2 explosions will happen virtually simultaneously to our senses, but there's always a possibility of a hang fire. Now, even if the hang fire is a fraction of a second, there's a possibility that if we flinch, we're going to throw our shot off in that quarter of a second. So if we don't flinch when the priming charge goes off, we are not going to flinch when the main charge goes off in the barrel. Our primary vehicle for conquering the Flintlock Flinch will be something called dry firing. And if you shoot modern firearms, there's already a very good chance that you're already familiar with the concept of dry firing. Just a quick clarification for our purposes today. When we say dry fire, we could either mean a completely dry pan or powder in the pan, but there's nothing in the barrel. So all through this process, we're not going to load the gun until we're actually ready to take a real shot. Dry firing is a fantastic tool to keep in our training toolbox that gives us a good bit of the benefits of actually shooting live rounds, but we don't have to spend any ammunition. So what is dry firing? Dry firing is when we take our firearm, we unload it. If you're shooting with modern firearms, it is exceptionally crucial that you make sure that your firearm is unloaded. So make sure that you're still following all the firearm safety rules when you dry fire. Very important. We don't want to have any accidents here. So to check for empty, we're going to make sure that there's no magazine in there. We're going to stick our finger in there. Yep, confirm with our eyes and our finger, no magazine. Confirm that there's no round in the chamber with our finger and our eyes. Okay, we know this firearm is unloaded. I'm going to be pointing the gun in a safe direction. There's just a little hill back there. So I have my unloaded firearm. So I'm going to go through all the motions that I would normally do whenever I was actually shooting. So I can come from here, draw, get that sight, and then press the trigger. So what this helps us to do is get down so many of those fundamentals. I can practice my draw without having to go to the range. I can practice my presentation without having to go to the range. I can practice picking up those sights of that red dot. So that's the most relevant piece for us as we take this training tool that is for modern firearms and apply it to muzzle loading flintlocks. Our first step in the dry fire process is to dry fire without any powder in the pan, and this is going to help us become accustomed to the movement of the lock. Now on modern firearms, unless it's an open bolt machine gun, the moment between trigger pull and ignition of the primary cartridge is virtually indistinguishable to our senses. On flintlocks, of course, there are several large moving parts with mass. The movement of these pieces, namely the hammer, can be felt by the shooter and could potentially throw off a shot, especially with large locks like on a military musket. And this first step in the dry fire training helps us to focus on the fundamentals and train and hone our shooter's mindset. Focus on the sight picture. For a moment, nothing else in the world exists except for the sights and the target. You're relaxed and calm with no anxiety about making the shot or pressing the trigger. Breathing is calm and deliberate, even if you've run and are out of breath. Your mind empties and your breathing becomes controlled as you gain the sight picture. When you're ready to take the shot, press the trigger gently and let the discharge surprise you from how relaxed and focused you were on the sights and the target. Follow through with the shot. Do not hurriedly snatch the rifle away from your shoulder. Soak in the moment of making the shot and hold still until after you've heard or seen your target struck. This experience can last less than a second or several seconds depending on the situation, need, or experience of the shooter. It's very important when you're dry firing your flintlock to make sure that the frizzen and the pan is closed. Because if the frizzen is back and the pan is open, when you dry fire, you could actually potentially damage your mainspring. So whenever you dry fire, you want to make sure that your pan is closed. And if you don't want to eat through your flints, you can actually take a piece of wood, shape it into the shape of your flint, and then put it in the jaws just like your flint would be. That way the mainspring still has some resistance as it goes forward and strikes the frizzen. Let's talk a little bit about the position of the rifle, the grip, and the trigger pull. Our basic posture is that we need to be upright and as relaxed as possible. When we come up to gunpoint, what we want to do is not have a death grip with our hands. We just want them to be lightly resting on the rifle. So we need to use essentially the least amount of muscular force to hold the rifle up and make the shot. So you notice I'm not bent way back over like this. I'm standing up straight. My head is not craned or strained onto the stock, but it's just nicely placed. So that if I'm standing normally, just bring the rifle up, no change in my posture. And like we talked about earlier with the breathing, we want our breathing to be regular. We don't want it to be panicky. When we bring it up, we want it to be nice, even, nice and relaxed. Because remember, our overall goal is to not move the rifle when we pull the trigger. So the best way to do that is to remain relaxed as possible and utilize our skeletal structure to support the weight of the rifle and use as little muscular force as possible to hold the rifle up once it's there. So again, remember, don't have a really hard grip on the gun with your hands. You want them just to be lightly placed on there. And we want our arms to be at a 90-degree angle to each other. So my left hand is placed essentially almost at the balance point of this rifle. This is not a fantastically balanced rifle, so I have to hold it a little bit back from the balance point. The balance point's right there. As far as our arms go, what we're going to want to do is have them at a 90-degree angle to each other. So our right arm is going to kind of do this chicken wing out. That's going to create a pocket right here, basically right on the inside of this line of my waistcoat. So when we pop our arm up like this, the curved butt of the rifle here is going to fit nicely right in there. So that's going to chicken wing out and provide that nice pocket. And my left arm is going to be, again, underneath that balance point of the gun. So it's not going to be off here to the side, not going to be way over here. It's going to be underneath the balance point of the gun. And remember, when you bring the rifle up, you don't want there to be an air gap between the butt of the gun and your shoulder, because that's just going to make you feel the recoil a lot more. Don't be scared of your gun. These muzzle loaders don't kick that hard, even the big ones. Even the muskets feel about the same. And last but certainly not least, the trigger pull. I like to press the trigger with the first pad of my forefinger. And that gives me a lot of control over rifles. With pistols, it's another matter. I like to shoot with a different part of my finger. But with rifles, what I like to do is press the trigger with the first pad of my finger. Let's go ahead and look at this trigger pull up nice and close. So as you can see, this Pedersoli has two triggers. It has a rear set trigger and the front main trigger. So what I'm going to do is, again, have my hand over the gun. You see I've got a lot of hand on the gun to make sure I maintain control. My grip is relaxed though, and I pull that heavier back trigger. That's probably a 10-pound plus trigger, but that's okay, because that's not the one I'm going to take a shot with. On the main trigger, and then this is just a hair trigger. It's very, very light, just like 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds. Apply pressure, bam. The next phase in our dry firing training is going to be doing a flash in the pan. Now obviously when we're shooting, we wouldn't want to see a flash in the pan, but we're going to use this as our next step to inoculate ourselves to this flash going off right beside our face. So we're going to focus on the fundamentals, on not moving the sights when we pull the trigger, even though there's a big flash going off in our face. So I'm going to come up, present, let out, and not move an inch, not a millimeter. And remember that we still also want to follow through and hold our shot placement there for just a second after we pull the trigger. So once more, fundamentals, breathe, Relax. Focus on the sights and the threat, and don't move when you pull the trigger. There we go. So remember, our overall goal is to disturb the rifle and our sight picture as little as possible when we make that perfect trigger press. And making that perfect shot, dry fire, or trigger press is accomplished by relaxation, breath control, and body positioning. One of the things you can do to incorporate another training element in this step is to prime the pan while moving, come to a shooting stance or brace position, press the trigger, and practice your fundamentals. This will bring in another element into your training that presents real-world distractions and might show you what fundamentals you need to focus on improving. It also gives you practice handling the most fiddly bits of loading a flintlock, handling the powder and priming the pan. As you can see, having a range and firing live rounds is not essential to learn and ingrain crucial elements of marksmanship. All of these techniques and principles may be practiced during dry fire. You can save money and time on powder, lead, flints, gas, travel, and range fees. Practicing these basics and dry firing with your flintlock will improve your shooting, just as it does shooters of modern firearms. If you're new to muzzle loading or you're starting to incorporate some of these dry firing techniques, make sure and start slow and methodical. Once you feel comfortable with the process, you can start speeding up. Speed it up until you find yourself making a mistake and your fundamentals falling off the wagon. Identify what the issue is, dial back that speed just a little bit, and make the correction. Now, I would recommend that this self-diagnosis only be done when you have a very firm grasp of the fundamentals and a lot of dry and live fire under your belt, if not some proper instructions from reputable firearms instructors. So remember, these fundamentals and these principles that we're talking about with the flintlock do not just apply to the flintlock. They apply to all firearms, new and old. So if you go receive training on modern rifle or pistol, you're going to be able to learn those same fundamentals and be able to translate them over to muzzle loading. Oh, and one thing, as a note, YouTube videos do not count as proper instruction. Go take some classes, guys. I highly recommend it. So remember those fundamentals. Relax, control your breathing, get that nice trigger pull, and as that gun discharges, keep it dead level because you have trained yourself to become immune to that flash and that boom. I hit exactly where I was aiming. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you have not, and give this video a like and a comment, and go check out some of our other videos on living history and shooting flintlocks. I think if you like this video, you might like some of those other ones. Everyone, have a fantastic day, and we'll see you down the trail in the next video.